Thinking about those little details ahead of time are really important because it means that on test day that you're not stressing, you're not worried about the little things.
Nicole, welcome to the MCAT podcast. Thanks for joining me, hanging out.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to be talking to a newer new to this show and a newer Blueprint MCAT live online instructor. So congrats, I guess, first of all, on scoring well enough on the MCAT that Blueprint's like, yeah, you scored well enough. Now let's see if you can teach it as well.
Thank you. Yes.
So let's talk about your journey with the MCAT. The question I love to ask the newer instructors here on this show is, what is the biggest mistake you think students make when it comes to MCAT prep?
I think the biggest mistake, and you'll probably hear lots of Blueprint instructors say this, is not enough practice and too much content review. I think I was definitely a little bit guilty of this in my own prep. I think it's a lot easier to do targeted review and to just passively read through a textbook section. It's a lot harder to actually put in that work to do your practice questions and do the hard reflection, whereas that's where you're actually going to see your score increases from. So I definitely say that's probably the easiest mistake to make when prepping.
It doesn't bruise your ego when you're just reading books passively, as you mentioned,
Precisely.
right? But it hurts my ego a lot going through these questions going, oh, I'm pretty dumb. I don't know any of this stuff anymore. So that's definitely a hard one.
I've taken the MCAT, and sometimes, when I'm working through questions still, I have to go back and review things, or, I'll get a question wrong when I'm working through it. So it's definitely, yes, MCAT instructors I have to go back and review topics and concepts and, what is the glomerulus again? All the time.
So when a student is stuck in that rut of, I don't want to move forward because I'm scared of the scores that I'll see. I'm scared of answering questions and being told I'm wrong. And I feel comfortable reading a book because I'm not getting feedback that I'm not smart, that I can't remember this stuff. How is a student supposed to break out of that?
I think it's really about how you view it, right? So I think a lot of students struggle with this of not wanting to take practice tests and not wanting to sit for practice tests because it's hard. It's not fun. It takes the whole day. And I think it's really about adjusting your mindset from doing practice questions or taking practice tests, especially early to mid in your prep. It's not actually about the score. It's about the practice. It's about the act of getting used to sitting down and taking a really hard test for a whole day. And so in that sense, obviously, though, you don't want to get questions wrong. Every question that you get wrong is another tool that you can put in your toolbox. So especially early on, you really have to distance yourself from those actual scores, or if you're tracking, percentages when you're doing practice sections. You really have to dissociate that from a while and just trust that you're putting in the work and that you're going to get results because, partway through my prep, for example, when I was taking Blueprint practice tests, I had a 5-point score decrease at one point in my prep, which when you did the average at the end, it was more of a plateau than really that dramatic of a decrease. But you have to be able to look at score plateaus or even decreases as you're prepping as just another hurdle that you're just going to keep pushing past because you know that you're putting in the work by doing practice questions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that you talked about kind of the whole sitting for a while, just getting used to that even. I was doing an Instagram Live this morning, and a student came on, and she was very early on in her kind of pre-med MCAT journey. And she's like, I've been trying to do a lot of research about this whole thing about the MCAT. And one thing that stood out to me was the sitting time, like the total the seated time or whatever it's called. It's like 7.5 hours or so. Of just being seated. And she's like how do you prepare for that? And I told her just like the analogy that everyone uses, right, of running a marathon, you train and blah blah blah. And we got through the conversation, and at some point I'm like, actually what I need to make is pants for the MCAT that have a built-in like butt cushion. So literally on the Instagram live, I went and registered the domain MCATPants.com. We're gonna make some pants. They got a little butt cushion like you're a bicyclist. And
I want to count of how many domains you have.
It's a lot. And compression socks built in for your legs as well. So yeah, MCATPants.com coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, and this is how detailed you have to be in your prep, right? I talk to my students about this, like plan what you're gonna eat, like something that's gonna feel good, when you're not super hungry because you're probably nervous, something that's not gonna upset your stomach. Don't wear pants that, you get sweaty after you're sitting down for a couple hours. That is a big jeans for the MCAT proponent for that reason. And you have to, thinking about those little details ahead of time are really important because it means that on test day that you're not stressing, you're not worried about the little things. So that way you can stay focused. So you're not uncomfortable, you're not hungry, your stomach is nice and settled and doing great. So.
Yeah, I had a student once, I was talking with her about her schedule, her plan for the MCAT, and I asked her, what are you going to eat on your day? And she's like, I'm going to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch. And I said, when's the last time you ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? She goes, I don't know. I'm like, think about that, right? Why would you risk potentially, right? Super benign sandwich that every kid grows up on. Why would you risk that all of a sudden, like, that's not going to sit right? Because you haven't had it in forever or whatever. Like that's the level of detail that I hope everyone can get to by listening to us say that you should get there and think through these things.
Yeah, plan ahead the small details for sure.
Plan ahead the small details and go check out MCATPants.com. So talk about the transition for you from obviously being a good MCAT test taker, because to be an MCAT, Blueprint MCAT live online instructor, you have to score pretty high. And then you have to prove that you can teach the stuff as well. Talk about that transition from, I can do it. Like I took the test, I scored well, from how do I get that out of my head to help other people?
Yeah, I think one of the things is, one, I was lucky that I think I was very analytic in my own prep about the way I approach things. So I think in some sense, a lot of the things that I've learned from Blueprint and a lot of the tricks I picked up from Blueprint instructors, I was already doing on my own because I had done so much research and listening to resources like the MCAT podcast while I was studying to really build up those strategies. So I think I had some of that already in my back pocket, but a lot of it at Blueprint, we talk about a lot something called minding the expert gap. Which is that ability to really break something down and put it into small pieces such that anybody, I guess in the context of MCAT prep could understand a concept that you're working through. So I think it's practicing how to break things down. And luckily with Blueprint, we're also always working with co-instructors, primary and secondary as well. So it's nice to have other people to bounce your ideas off of or say, how would you explain this? So I think it's a lot of watching and learning through our training process. Then I also do have teaching experience. So I think it's something that I've always, I guess, kind of naturally enjoyed. So I think maybe I had a little bit of extra going in, but it's definitely a skill that you have to keep building as a teacher.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then when it comes to Blueprint Live Online, a lot of students will say, like, especially when they're going and they know I'm going to take a course, they look at Blueprint, they look at the just regular online course, which doesn't include the live instruction, or they have the live online. Who do you think needs or responds best to live online instruction?
Yeah, I think two of the biggest benefits of live online are like accountability and community. So when you have the other people in your class who you can rely on, you can be hanging out with in the chat. A lot of classes now, we also have our own Discord channel. So there's a lot of, it's not just about your in-class time. It's also about having a community of other people who are going through the same things as you. I think that, like I said, that level of showing up for class at the same time each week and being able to build a relationship with your instructor and, like, and have someone who can be that point person for you, consistent person to email. And in class, this is something that I actually didn't even realize before I start. A lot of the class discussion is not just focused on content. Everything is practice, right? Because that's what we say, Blueprint practice is what earns you point for every, we have done analysis and calculations out there, how many points your score improves per practice question. that you do. And it's really what drives score increases. So a lot of our discussions in class are centered around strategy and test taking tips and everything like that. So especially if you feel like you're a person who's not sure how to tackle things on that strategy and reflection side of things, I think live online is really, really helpful for that. Like I said, because not only can you get your questions answered live, and that the lecture is going to be is tailored in terms of what questions we do based on what the people who are attending class that day's interests are. I think having that strategy talk is really, really valuable for students.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think something, the live online course is not just content review. It's how do you apply that,
I would say it's
the
not like
knowledge and
the
skills.
content review is like a side hustle of live online. It's a side effect of sometimes you need content to answer questions. But a lot of times, spoiler alert, the MCAT is very critical thinking based, very analysis based. There's a billion passages on the MCAT, and that's because a ton of the information you need is from the passage. So it's you have to know that content, but if you don't know how to apply it, it doesn't do you any good. So so it goes so far as to say that's the whole test.
Yeah. The community part that you mentioned earlier is huge and something we've talked about forever here on the MCAT podcast. That a lot of times a study group is the best way to study for the MCAT. You have that small little community of people maybe one person's good at cars, one person is good at psych soc, one person's good at chem phys, etc. And you don't need to spend money on that. So again, finding a course or finding a study group or whatever fits your specific needs is great. So, well, Nicole, I'm excited to dive into the diagnostic with you in our next episode, continuing our breakdown of the Blueprint MCAT diagnostic. Again, when it comes to, as we wrap up here, when it comes to students who are struggling to get out of this rut of content review and doing the practice questions and actually going through the motion of taking a full length and sitting there for hours, talk to the student who gets their diagnostic score back and it's a 485. And then they take their first full length and it's a 486. They take their second full length and it's a 487. And they're just not getting the scores that they think they should be getting. Maybe they have a really solid GPA, but just something's not adding up. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think it's like at that point, especially, depending how far in somebody's prep they were, if you've done a lot of content versus if you took those practice tests, over the course of 2 weeks, you're probably not going to see a lot of score increases. But I think it's really time for reflection as to why you're not testing as well as you hope you would. For a lot of students, testing anxiety is a huge thing, whether that be on test day or while you're taking your practice tests as well. I think trying to step back and figure out how that's affecting you, looking at, for example, maybe if you do a passage or a section in isolation, let's say you just do a chem phys full practice session, if you're doing a lot better on those sections than you are when you actually sit down for the whole test, then maybe it's a stamina thing. Maybe you need to study for longer periods of time, or maybe you need to, when you're doing your day-to-day practice, you need to do 2 practice sections in a row. Maybe you're running out of time on sections and you've been doing your practice untimed. If you're at the beginning of your prep, that might not be a big deal because untimed practice can be super valuable. But you can see, thinking about going through this thought process of you really have to keep track of your own data and really be a critical thinker, because if you're studying for the MCAT, you're either a college student or you're beyond that. You have done a lot of learning in your life, you've taken a lot of tests, you know yourself really well. And so I think you should really need to rely on that knowledge and trust that you can do that analysis and figure out. And if you're working with somebody, with whether you have a study friend or whether you are working with a tutor at Blueprint, I think always reaching out to others saying, hey, what worked for you? Did you go through this? Did you struggle? What's a normal amount of, what score increase should I be seeing at this point? So I think really taking that step back, or if there's other obligations in your life that maybe have been getting in the way, maybe you're stressing about because, you have somebody dealing with a health issue in your family. Those things take a toll on you, and especially when you're being put in a high stress situation with testing. Those other stresses can kind of start leaking out from under the surface and affecting what's actually happening in your test in a way that you don't even feel or realize in the moment. But when you look back, you say, oh, wow, my score, I had that score plateau for a while, and it's because I had too much on my plate and I needed to drop something to focus more on MCAT prep for the next 2 months, for example.
Yeah. It's such an important part of this process is just constantly checking in, constantly trying to figure out, constantly just asking yourself, like, am I okay? Am I doing what I need to be doing? Just all of that stuff. It's so important. All right.
Mhm.
Well, I'm excited to jump in to our next episode. Let's go and hurry up and get to that.